Presenting us with a beautiful open world to explore, the fourth game of the Elder Scrolls series, Oblivion, allows a deep dive into the story of Cyrodiil, a wealthy and powerful nation, being the centre of the Empire. Often being regarded as the middle child, Oblivion was stuck between the revolutionary Morrowind and the vastly popular Skyrim, so it can often become the game that's forgotten. But when it comes to its quests and stories, many agree that Oblivion is unparalleled, with the writers creating deep and enticing adventures. These deeper stories are tied to even deeper mysteries, with the Elder Scrolls' trademark mysterious narrative holding true. Quests take unsuspecting twists and turns, with nothing ever being what it seems. Even many years after its release, the many pages of lore contained in books are still being examined, and the world of Oblivion still holds unrevealed secrets, encouraging players to continue to theorise. An iceberg is a popular image format that contains theories and conspiracies, and it's ordered so that the most well-known theories are gathered higher up the iceberg, and the lower and deeper the points are placed on the iceberg, the more mysterious the conspiracies become. We explored the Skyrim part of the Elder Scrolls iceberg in a previous video, and now it's time to cover the Oblivion section of the iceberg. So let's mount our horse and traverse the vast and deep land that is the Oblivion iceberg. Levitation Act. If we eavesdrop on some idle conversations, we can hear the mentioning of the Levitation Act of 421. In the 422nd year of the Third Era, the use of levitation magic was banned throughout the Empire. This piece of law was most likely introduced in order to explain the changes in Oblivion, with actions such as floating over city walls no longer being allowed in order to hide cities behind loading screens. Dover of the North supposes a law-friendly explanation for why levitation was banned, and this was that levitation made it difficult for guards to apprehend criminal wizards. The banning of levitation here could make the public feel safer. But curiously, the Levitation Act was passed before the events of Morrowind. But in Morrowind, levitation magic can be used freely. Could this introduce a plot hole into the Levitation Act excuse? Shouldn't levitation have been illegal throughout Morrowind? The answer could be somewhat more complex. Slavery was another practice that was outlawed by the Empire, eras before the event of Morrowind. But slavery was again seen in Morrowind. This was allowed due to the Treaty of the Armistice between Morrowind and the Empire, which created a lasting peace. Morrowind accepted the whelming presence of Imperial soldiers, where in return, they were allowed to continue certain customs, such as slavery. Natura Sivdus suggested the condonings of activities could have extended to levitation as well. Such was a prominent city located in the Gold Coast of Western Cyrodiil, having been recorded through many maps and stories within the Second Era. But come the Third Era, during the events of Oblivion, all that remained of the notable city was the ruins of a Fort Such. It seemed that only in the space of a few years, the entire city of Such disappeared, with only the ruins of a fort left to tell the tale. If we look at Fort Such from above, we can see a clearing surrounding the fort, and it seems large enough to hold what would have been a reasonably sized city. Multiple scholars wrote in books that can be found in the Elder Scrolls Online of them visiting Such within the Second Era, and one book, The Thief of Virtue, details a master thief of the Thieves Guild, Ravius Tyrannus, having attempted to rob the treasures from the Baron Ignis's castle. With many of these events recorded in writing, Such seemingly did exist, but how could this city just magically disappear? Some earlier E3 demo videos showed maps that contained Such in a way that was more likely going to be a city, so potentially this was cut content, with the other references having accidentally been left in. But the Elder Scrolls Online reintroduces Such into the lore, and not just the fort. Such can be seen on the map in the Dark Brotherhood DLC. So is there actually a reason in the lore as to why Such disappeared? The most common explanation would be that Such was quickly sacked or abandoned before the event of Oblivion, with only the remnant of the fort remaining during the time of the video game. Caramel goes further into this theory, theorising that Such could have in fact been the Hollow City, a city of unknown origin that was thrust into the cold harbour by the Daedric Prince of Life, Meridia. Many parallels can be drawn between the Hollow City's architecture to that of a city that's located within the Gold Coast of Cyrodiil. A city to the south of such, Anvil, seems to have the same red-tiled roofs and architecture, so perhaps the lost city could have come from the same location. It also seems strange that if the city of such was destroyed, why are there only remains of the fort? Meridia could have easily moved this city, without its fort, into the Cold Harbour. The Hollow City also contains 4 watchtowers, some which could have acted like lighthouses. Such could have indeed stretched out to the west to the water, having their watchtowers shining their lights over to Hammerfall. Indeed, in Elder Scrolls Online, the whole of the Gold Coast was blocked off by Varen's Wall, in order to protect the lands from the Emperor Leovic. If we peek through this wall, we can see 2 watchtowers in the area that such should be located, so this could be a link. But now we've trapped our theory. If such was in fact the Hollow City that we could see in Elder Scrolls Online, then theoretically we should not see any of the watchtowers from behind Varen's Wall. Although we could theorise these towers were from a different part of such, perhaps from the fort, and they were selectively not moved. For us to fully understand the legitimacy of this theory, let's map out a timeline of the events we say took place in such. We know by the 5th century of the 3rd era, the only thing that remained of such were the ruins of Fort Such. Elder Scrolls Online is set in the 2nd era in the 6th century, which is when the protagonist of the Elder Scrolls Online, the Vestige, encounters the Hollow City. It was stated that the original inhabitants of the Hollow City fled or died over the next few centuries after the city was moved. So if the city was such, it should have disappeared well before the events of Elder Scrolls Online. Such can be found on multiple maps throughout Elder Scrolls history. One of them is on the cover of the Elder Scrolls Adventures, Redguard, and displays a map of West Tamriel, with such appearing in the Imperial Province. As part of Redguard, we can date this map to the 9th century of the 2nd era. Perhaps we could deem this as a sloppy reference to the Such fort, and the rest of the city could still have in fact disappeared. However, remember when we were talking about some of the scholars that mentioned Such in their writing? The Thief of Virtue cannot be specifically dated, but some of the other ones can. In the biographical book of the High King Yoren of Skyrim, it was mentioned that he spent some time in Such. Having been born only a couple of decades between the events of Elder Scrolls Online, if the book is indeed of truthful origins, then Such would have had to have existed around that time. It's most likely that Such is still present within the Elder Scrolls Online. Its mystery is just locked deep behind unopenable doors. As for what city the Hollow City really was, a stronger hypothesis is that the city is in fact the relocated city of Deladil. Deladil was a city filled with many scholars, artisans and dancers, having also been found within Cyrodiil. The inhabitants worshipped many different gods, but primarily they worshipped Meridia, who they built a magnificent temple for. But across the valley was another city, Abigalis, which held a dislike of Deladil and their newly built chapel. The king was driven to madness, sending his entire army to Deladil, wanting to kill all of its citizens. But when the king and his soldiers arrived, the land was empty, and the city of Deladil was gone. Meridia was said to be the one who moved the Hollow City, so it does make sense that she would have moved Deladil. Curiously, Abigalis can be found in Oblivion, hidden deep underground, with only the remains of a crypt left to tell the story. This can loosely be placed northeast of the Imperial City. So could the city of Deladil be a long forgotten name for the city of Such? I don't think it really seems to be the case. Perhaps the story for what happened for Such is still yet to be told. Secret tunnels under white gold. Looming over all of Cyrodiil, the tallest building, the White Gold Tower, acts as a home for the Elder Council and the Elder Scrolls, being the Imperial City Palace. But it's not only what we can see above the ground that makes it so impressive. Within the basement of this same tower, a bunch of oversized items can be found, including an oversized hourglass, the Glass of Time. This hourglass, when activated, reveals some secret tunnels, known as the Old Way. This maze of rooms and corridors leads to an Elder Scroll. But it's not just the tunnels that seem to be holding their secrets. The basement itself is intriguing. Along with a giant hourglass, housed within the basement is a giant throne, club and crystal ball. Now why are these objects so big? And what are they really doing just stowed away in a basement? Now there isn't really a clear indication within the game to suggest who exactly they belong to, but the varieties of faith could leave a small clue. Standar the Steadfast, the god of mercy, who was a patron of the Imperial Legion, was said to have accompanied Tiber Septim in his later years. The Septim Empire, founded by Tiber Septim, spanned across Tamriel, with its capital being the Imperial City, which is the home of the White Gold Tower. Not much is known of Standar, but perhaps its depiction could be larger than an average Imperial, having been one of the 9 divines. But the connections here are still quite loose. Elder Scrolls writer Michael Kirkbride wrote in the Imperial Census of Daedra Lords that Sanguin, the Prince of Hedonism, was recorded to have specifically resided in the White Gold Tower, and his large stature would also require bigger than ordinary items. But this text, like quite a bit of Kirkbride's work, is not located in any Elder Scrolls games, so this could be rebuked as not being canon. From all these theories though, we can assume that these larger items were most likely made for an individual of an era long ago, and when the items were no longer needed, were stowed in the basement. As for who the individual was, that's still up for debate. Even the origin of the White Tower is up for debate. Crossing back to our such theory discussion before, we stated that the Hollow City was most likely the city of Deladil mentioned in the Unholy Temple. They were said to have run away due to the fury of Abigalis, who like Deladil had decided to build a great chapel of their own, which through their envy of Deladil turned out to be a much larger structure, built as a temple for the one they worship, Molag Bal. Now Abigalis is located on the shores of Lake Romer, which is just northeast of the Imperial City. This leads to another theory on the Iceberg, that the White Gold Tower is actually Molag Bal's temple. This would indeed match the description of a large and magnificent structure, but is there anything more than we can see to connect these two? The leader of Abigalis was Archmage King Enumeral, and in Elder Scrolls Online, Josaja mentions that the Staff of Towers, a highly powerful magical artifact, was created by Enumeral before being separated into 8 pieces. The 8th piece was made in the image of the White Gold Tower, and that was the only fragment that Enumeral kept. Could this fragment represent the tower that Enumeral himself created? Perhaps, but I'm not entirely convinced that the city of Abigalis did indeed create the White Gold Tower. The Withering of Deladil states that the shrine made by Molag Bal was made by rude soldiers, and although the tower was large, it was misshapen. This isn't really how I would describe the White Gold Tower. Now, let's prepare our frostbolts as we explore the surface layer of the iceberg. Elysia's burial place. Many eras ago, the humans of Cyrodiil were freed from slavery, forming the First Empire, and they were led by the Empress and Freedom Fighter Elysia. She strikes quite a similar resemblance to the real-world figure Joan of Arc, with both of them being recognised as a saint after their deaths. History suggests that Joan of Arc herself was burnt at the stake, with her body being cremated twice more before her ashes were thrown into the River Seine. But Elysia was said to have been buried, with the legendary city of Sancretor stating that Elysia was buried in the catacombs beneath Sancretor. And since the Riemann dynasty, it became tradition that emperors would be buried in the citadel's underpassages. But if we explore the Sancretor tombs, we can only see the tombs of those from the Riemann dynasty, with no evidence that this was in fact Elysia's resting place. The legendary city of Sankar actually has a footnote where it states that the actual burial place of Elysia is unknown. With this, it also proposes a conflicting theory. The Saint Elysia is actually buried in the Imperial City, at the Temple of the One. The Imperial City was the capital of the First Empire, and the Temple of the One was dedicated to Akatosh, the deity of the Elysian Order. So this suggestion from the text could be the most likely explanation for where Elysia was buried. Plink 333 suggests that the Sanctor burial place theory is actually just propaganda pushed by the Riemann emperors in order to portray themselves as a deity of sorts. Sanctor was definitely an important place to the Riemann, but perhaps it was not because Elysia was buried there. They could have fabricated this burial in order to make their own places of importance become ingrained into popular culture through strengthening their ties with previous empires. CE Next counters this though, and emphasises that Sanctor could indeed be a place of utmost importance. Sanctor, through the book Remanada, is said to mean Golden Hill. Hills convey a sense of importance throughout Elder Scrolls. The Arcturian heresy states that Tiber Septim obtained the mighty title of Talos at the Battle of Old Heraldon. Pro is derived from Arol, which is a dragon word for hill. We can even see loose connections in Skyrim, with the last Dragonborn legend beginning in Whiterun. Whiterun's name in Dragon is Arol Sedova, meaning Hill of Dragon. It seems all legends emerge from a hill. But these all state the beginnings of legends, not necessarily their endings. If we explore Anvil, a prophet can be seen evangelizing to the people of the city.
Cyrodiil, come! He said, old Riemann, born from the earth that is Alesh.
Al-Esh is the title given to Elysia by her followers. So essentially, this is saying that Riemann was born from the earth that was Elysia. So could the Riemann have been born in Sanctor, beginning on the Golden Hill, having come from the burial place of Elysia? It's definitely a possibility, but we also need to keep in mind the wording of this prophet. He references this quote in a third person, and this follows with,
And yet he would scorn this country now. Repent, I say. Repent!
This could actually be the prophet ridiculing this statement, with the Remanada stating that I am Cyrodiil, come, is stated by the babe Riemann on his throne. So could this have yet been more propaganda they're trying to pass as truth? So both of these burial places could still definitely be a possibility. Now let's talk about a very niche theory on this iceberg to do with Elysia, and that is Elysia created dragons. This theory seems to have lost clarity between the time the iceberg was created and when I started working on this video, as there doesn't seem to be much evidence, or voices for that matter, to support this theory. The Trials of St. Elysia states that the dragon god of time, Akatosh, made a covenant with Elysia. As long as Elysia's generation were true to the dragon blood, Akatosh would keep the gates of Oblivion sealed, denying the armies of the Daedra. The Remanada details how Elysia as a spirit declared, I am the healer of all men and the mother of dragons. Now Elysia being known as the mother of dragons could be taken literally, which could be where the theory of Elysia creating dragons originated from. But I think that being the mother of dragons is more likely to be the origin of the Dragonborn, as opposed to dragons as a whole. If we are to believe the text of the Remanada, it suggests that the Riemann is indeed a descendant of Elysia, with Elysia, Riemann and Talos all wearing the Amulet of Kings and lighting the dragon fires, so they could most likely all be the same type of Dragonborn. All mentions of the term dragon seemingly stems from Elysia, or does it? In Skyrim, Marsh, originally a dragon priest, came into possession of the Black Book and became the proclaimed first Dragonborn, and Marsh himself was around during the Dragon War, having refused to fight with the dragon Alduin, so Marsh is definitely older than Elysia. The Book of the Dragonborn hints at the obscurity of the Dragonborn history, saying that it is both and neither a divine mystery. Michael Kirkbride, one of the main writers of the Elder Scrolls, tried to clarify the confusion around the first Dragonborn by saying that Elysia didn't have the power to absorb dragon souls. She had a much more nuanced power, to dream of liberty and to give it a name. And on her deathbed, she made a covenant with Akatosh. But this only seems to cloud our vision, as it presents the idea that there are different types of Dragonborn. The Inducer suggests a simpler solution, that Marsh, of Nordic origin, was the first known Dragonborn in Tamrielic history, while Elysia was the first Dragonborn in Cyrodiilic history. And while it seems as of right now that Marsh was the first Dragonborn, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case in the future. As for who created the dragons, perhaps the Nordic history could help us there. Shallowdoor's Insight is a book that can be found in Skyrim, but is written with extremely messy handwriting. Many users of the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages and the Imperial Library have amazingly deciphered this script, with the 4th paragraph stating that dragons had existed since the beginning of time, but were wild and uncivilized, with Alduin being the creator of the dragon civilization and the firstborn. Now this pretty much concludes that Alesia could not have created the dragons, with her only being born sometime in the First Era. Finally, it's time for us to open the Oblivion Gates and explore the Oblivion Plane of the Iceberg. Deep Ones. Located deep in the Great Forest is the isolated settlement of Hackdirt. The inhabitants of this mining town are quite dismissive, and even quite hostile to outsiders, including the player.
Shh! Not in front of the stranger.
Why are they so closed off? Often talking in riddles and meeting in places veiled in mystery. The Chapel of Brethren is their place of meeting every night, where they recite the Bible of the Deep Ones. The Deep Ones are a race that are located deep underground, and can be faintly heard in the caverns beneath Hackdirt, where the residents descend to at nights for gatherings. This story is actually a reference to a H.P. Lovecraft story, Shadow over Innsmouth, where Robert Olmsted discovers the ruined town of Innsmouth and realises that its inhabitants are also worshipping the Deep Ones. In Shadow over Innsmouth, the Deep Ones are described as having greyish-green skin, fish-like heads, and unblinking eyes. But in Oblivion, we never actually get to see who the Deep Ones are. So are the Deep Ones merely just an Easter egg? Or could there be a deeper resemblance of them in the game? Maybe there are some more clues within the Bible of the Deep Ones. The text here is yet again coded, and when decoded, is practically identical to the book Engasta Kavata Kavakas. This is written by Engasta, who is a powerful Slode necromancer. This is the crux for the theory that the Slodes are actually the Deep Ones. Out of all the races throughout Tamriel, the Slodes seem to be the ones that are the most fish-like, which due to H.P. Lovecraft's work, is what we would assume the Deep Ones to look like. A possible problem for the Slodes being the Deep Ones is that they require water to be able to move, due to their extreme weight, and Hackdirt has a considerable lack of water. But there is a well located in Hackdirt, which does indicate that there is water underneath the town. Perhaps this water is deep underground, a place where these Deep Ones would reside. The White Gore has actually written a narrative of how Engasta himself spawned the mysticism of the Deep One, having originally been granted the town by the Governor Rickton, with Engasta then experimenting upon its people. This could be possible, as in Redguard, Engasta did have the whole island of Strossum Kai under a spell, so why not a whole town? While Engasta does die before the events of Oblivion, it's not beyond reason that he had other Slodes, perhaps necromancers, in place to continue the illusion. But no Elder Scrolls mystery just has one solution. Some, such as Mr. Vivek, believe that the Deep Ones are just being controlled by the antagonist of the Oblivion, the Maroons Dagon. Going back to Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth, the cult within the town were worshipping a Deep One known as Father Dagon. See the similarities in the name? The Bible of the Deep Ones, before translation, is also in Daedric runes, so this could be another subtle connection. But this is really as far as this theory goes, and if this was actually the case, I would have expected them to play a more integral role in Oblivion, perhaps being called to arms like the Order of the Mythic Dawn to help Dagon in the Oblivion crisis. Camelworks, uncontent with these theories, proposed another, that the Deep Ones are actually Daedra not on the surface of Maroon's Dagon, but Molag Bal, the Brethren of Hackdirt, the people who are closest to the Deep Ones, transitioning to become Deep Ones themselves, as opposed to be like vampires, hiding in caverns and avoiding the sunlight. According to Vampires of Vardenfell, Book 2, Molag Bal is the father of the vampires, so this transition would make sense. Jive, one of the members of the town, says that the Deep Ones,
They helped us, made us rich, but there was a terrible price. Blood. And worse.
If they were vampires, then the price of blood could be taken literally. Aetherius Moslin managed to translate the runes of the Bible of the Deep Ones, and recites passages from it to her fellow cult members. Her likeness of you is rumoured to be at her greatest when you were a vampire, which would be great evidence, but I couldn't confirm this myself. Definitely check out Camelwork's video on the Deep Ones if you want to delve into his theory further. But Zecramundus is not totally convinced by this theory, as the Brethren, while trying to avoid sunlight, also have their vocabulary limited, and have warped features such as larger eyes. Them changing into a vampire doesn't really explain this. A fish still seems more likely. Perhaps we are still missing some signs within the Elder Scrolls universe. Hackdirt isn't actually the only place where references to Lovecraft can be seen. Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's Plane of Oblivion, looks very similar to H.P. Lovecraft's universe in the book, The Call of Cthulhu. Elias uses this to propose that perhaps the Deep Ones actually originate from this realm, the realm of H.P. Lovecraft. The creatures most likely responsible for this are the Lurkers, who are the species of Daedra, amphibious humanoids who would most definitely match a physical representation of the Deep Ones. This, like the previous two theories, would satisfy the Bible of the Deep Ones surface layer text, if we are not to believe that a translation was actually intended. Otherwise, I'm still liking the Slodes being the cause of Hackside's undoing. But it's quite likely that the mysteries of Hackdirt are still yet to be uncovered, with a much deeper, darker world waiting to be exposed as the Elder Scroll universe unravels. Hero of Kvatch is Pelennor Whitestrake. The Hero of Kvatch is the player you control throughout the events of Oblivion. As we've investigated in our previous Skyrim Iceberg, it's likely that at the end of Oblivion, the Hero of Kvatch becomes Sheogorath through the process of mantling, which involves the adoption of a role, so much so that it often consumes them, reshaping them into how the role is perceived to be. But was Sheogorath the only character that the Hero of Kvatch emulated? Many believe that the Pelennor Whitestrake and the Hero of Kvatch had too much in common to be separate entities. The Pelennor Whitestrake, who was often regarded as the Divine Crusader, was a legendary warrior, conquering kingdoms, and became Elysia's champion. In the Knights of the Nine, the Hero of Kvatch meets Pelennor Whitestrake through a vision, who helps the former on their quest to defeat Umarul the Unfeathered. Throughout these quests, the Hero of Kvatch assembles the armour of Pelennor, and at its conclusion, also gains the title of the Divine Crusader. And people like Wuftipuft suppose that the hero literally becomes the incarnation of Pelennor Whitestrake through this process, mantling. The main reasoning for this is that the Hero of Kvatch follows the same path of Pelennor, fighting his nemesis Umarul using Pellennor's items. But the narrative of Pelennor is not as simple as it seems. Written over 8 volumes of the Song of Pelennor, a disjointed and mysterious tale can be told. In the 3rd volume of this song, Pelennor slays the sorcerer kings of the Alliads, and screams praise to Riemann, a name that no one knew yet. Now Riemann Cyrodiil is the first emperor of the Second Era, which is a long time after these events have taken place. So how could Pelennor be predicting the events that happened eras into the future? This is the foundation of the theory that Pelennor is a time-travelling cyborg, with even Kirkbride stating that Pelennor is a robot in an Ask Me Anything thread. But while this is confirmed by an ex-writer of the game, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will become true in the game itself. So what can we see within the Elder Scrolls universe that could prove this? Volume 1 of the Song of Pelennor states that he was known as Pelennor the Whitestrake, because his left hand was made of killing light. This killing light was interpreted to be some sort of cyborg technology weaponry, with Riemann allegedly starting the first space program of Tamriel, which is why Pelennor shouted Riemann. But many refute this theory, with some like King Stuart Lewis stating that the killing light in Pellennor's arm could also be sorcery such as the Aedric Spear in Elder Scrolls Online. Sheogorath's beard also suggests that Riemann might not actually be the reference to the Riemann Empire of the future. Riemann translates to Light of Man. If Pelennor was crying out the Light of Man, he could have been declaring victory with some poetic flair. The Light of Man could be meaning the start of the Age of Man, with the Alliads succumbing to their ultimate downfall. If we cast our mind back earlier in this video to Elysia's burial place, we touched on the idea that the Remans could be artificially recreating history in order for their empire to be looked on in favour by many of the current civilization. This could have potentially also happened with the Song of Pelennor. Volumes 1 to 6 of the Song of Pelennor are explicitly stated to be taken from the so-called Reman manuscript located in the Imperial Library. So it seems plausible that yet again, the Remans inserted their empire into yet another history book, portraying that even the great Pelennor Whitestrake would fight for the Reman Empire. This clouding of history could also be used when discussing the origins of Pelennor. Even though Pelennor was said to have died after his fight with Umaril, having been cut into 8 pieces and carried away, years later, it's said that in the 8th volume, that Pelennor was at Alicia's deathbed. But how could he do that after he had died? This is perhaps the gemstone for the theory that Pelennor is somehow using time travel. One of the most common theories, and less far-fetched than space colonisation, states that the hero Kvatch travels back in time to consume the role of the Divine Crusader, taking the name of the Pelennor Whitestrake. Pelennor Whitestrake was known to be insane, having streaks of madness where he would kill without purpose. Note that near the end of the hero Kvatch adventure, they presumably become the Sheogorath, being the Prince of Madness. This theory states that Akatosh is the one that sends the player back in time, with the Pelennor stating that they share their madness with Akatosh. When the hero Kvatch first meets Uriel Septon, he foreshadows his destiny.
The dawn of Akatosh's bright glory may banish the coming darkness. With such hope, and with the promise of your aid, my heart must be satisfied.
The dawn of Akatosh's bright glory implies that the hero Kvatch is in fact Akatosh's companion. Could this be the same companion that we see in the Song of Pelennor? But most of this evidence discussing Pelennor is based upon the scriptures being truly accurate, which is questionable to say the least. Books in Elder Scrolls are not necessarily true, so perhaps, like Bull of Stars suggests, Pelennor Whitestrake could simply have been a Need who escaped slavery and was granted the relics of Crusader. The tale of his legacy could have been largely exaggerated and mythologised over time, with aspects such as the Divine Crusader being romanticised over time, while plot holes such as the sightings after death also beginning to form. Now let's explore a theory that does not appear on the Elder Scrolls Iceberg, but I think it's too interesting for us to leave behind. This theory has to do with the Dark Brotherhood. The Dark Brotherhood is a band of assassins that have existed across many eras, grouping a strong level of influence throughout Tamriel, and this still remains the case at the time of Oblivion. The hero Kvatch can choose to join the Dark Brotherhood, and upon doing so, receives contracts that require the death of certain targets throughout Tamriel. Often many of these contracts remain clouded as to who actually wants these targets dead, and a great example of this is the death of Titus Mede II in Skyrim. One such contract like this in Oblivion is the Next of Kin. This contract does not just require the elimination of one target, but 5, an elderly mother and her 4 adult children. The mother, Perennial Draconis, is a humble farmer. Matthias makes a living as the guard at Umbacano Manor. Kaelia is the captain of the Leyawind Guard. Andreas runs the Drunken Dragon Inn, and Sibylla becomes isolated from society, moving to a cave and spending time with her animals, and she is the only one who is hostile to you. Although some have gone astray, this is generally a well-respected family. So who would want the entire family dead? One common reason for killing off a whole family could be due to inheritance, and wanting to dispose of all the other heirs. Dagon Party suggested this inheritance could in fact be the Draconian Madstone. The Draconian Madstone is an ancient artifact that is said to give the user complete immunity to poison, and is found near the city of Bruma, which is also close to the Draconis family home. But the more obvious connection between these two are the names, strangely having a striking resemblance to each other. So if the Draconian Madstone is in fact rightfully the Draconis family's, who would want this Madstone all to themselves? Dagon Party supposes that in fact the Countess of Bruma, Narina Cavain, ordered the assassination of the Draconis. This is because it is her that wants the Draconian Madstone. Possessing this piece would make her relic collection complete, and Narina herself has admitted that the relic
has eluded me for many years.
When you collect the Draconian Madstone, she rewards you with another artifact from her collection, the Ring of the Viper Eye. This does seem strange though, as she said she wanted to complete her collection, yet when you enable her to do so, she starts giving her collection away as prizes? Maybe the Draconian Madstone is more important to her than it seems, and if so, would she be willing to murder a single family for her prize? It definitely seems like there could be a motive here, but she's not the only person who could have ordered the assassinations. Bosmer suggests that the Draconi's contract is the betrayal of the Dark Brotherhood coming to fruition. Later in the Dark Brotherhood quests, it's revealed that one of the leaders of the Dark Brotherhood, Matthew Bellamont, has a personal vendetta against the spiritual leaders of the Dark Brotherhood, the Night Mother, and the Dark Brotherhood itself, due to his own mother being assassinated by the guild that he leads. In fact, the hero Kvatch had their contracts swapped out so that they were killing all the members of the Black Hand, with Lucy and LeChance stating that the contracts were swapped.
After that, you eliminated the Draconis family, as ordered then. Betrayal.
It seems that after the Draconis family, the members of the Black Hand were being killed. But what if this was actually not the start of Bellamont's influence? Bellamont is infatuated with family, being angry with the mother of the Dark Brotherhood, concealing himself as part of the Black Hand family, and driven with purpose to appease his dead mother. Could killing a whole family be a form of personal revenge, where Bellamont was still forming his plan? Being his first victims, there could have been a more emotional killing and left a messier trace. And then later, instead of hiring the contracts himself, he swapped them out. Interestingly, the Night Mother's truth states that the spiritual leader of the Dark Brotherhood has 5 children, and one night she murdered her children. This 5 could also be represented by the 5 individuals within the Draconis contract. However, it would make more sense if there were 5 children rather than 4. I do think that Bellamont is most likely the individual behind Draconis' contract, deepening the Dark Brotherhood questline story. But there's one more theory that Niente Dada presents about the contract writer, with a much more sinister outlook. They hypothesize that the mother of the children, Perennia Draconis, ordered the assassinations of her children, and then herself. This more closely emulates the Night Mother, so it could satisfy the Dark Brotherhood connections that we do see. At the surface, Perennia is such a loving mother who wants to send her children gifts, who accidentally mistakes the assassin of the Dark Brotherhood as the gift buying and courier service. She gives the hero Kvatch a gift list, describing each child in order to ascertain which gift they should receive. But while describing her children, Perennia seems to be quite cynical, systematically fracturing the character of each of her children. She describes Matthias as a man who had fallen in with some pretty tough characters, and wants to give him a weapon saying, "I'll always be here to protect you." Now this statement doesn't seem to be that awful, but the damning evidence is if we visit Matthias' tombstone, which reads, "Here lies Matthias Draconis. His mother always told him he'd end up dead if he didn't clean up his life." For Kalia, Perennia states that she let herself go, asking to get her some pretty girl stuff to make her less boyish. What's also interesting here is where Perennia says by Mephala. Mephala is the Daedric prince of murder, lies and deception. This does seem like a strange Daedric prince to be swearing to, but let's visit this again later. Perennia describes Sibylla as a savage living with the animals, abandoning the Empire, but she is quite cordial about her other son Andreas. But one constant does remain. All of her children are estranged to an extent, now living with little contact with their mother. Could Perennia be a bitter mother wanting her children dead as revenge of their desertion of her? I don't think this is that likely. There isn't really any reason as to why Perennia would want to assassinate herself. If we revisit the Draconis tombstones after they have died, Perennia comes back to haunt you. I don't really see why she would come back to haunt the individual who enacted her plan. But by going through this theory, we've determined that Perennia is still not in fact the nicest of ladies, having sworn to Mephala. The Brother of Darkness states that the Dark Brotherhood was split from the Morag Tong, who were worshippers of Mephala. They believe that Mephala grew stronger with every murder that was committed in her name, with certain murders being better than others. The idea that there have been many Night Mothers is also presented in the Brothers of Darkness. So perhaps, like Tech 3 suggests, Perennia actually wants to become the Night Mother. Like the Night Mother was described in the Night Mother's Truth, Perennia wants to murder her children, and then kill herself. Perhaps with this being a highly valued murder. Maybe Perenia's obsession of the Night Mother was the reason her children left in the first place. And as for a ghost attacking you, this is yet another betrayal that hopefully leads to a murder that pleases Mephala yet again. That concludes our expedition of the Oblivion Iceberg. I hope these mysteries enthralled you as much as they did for me. If you want to consume even more Oblivion lore, I suggest watching YouTubers such as Camelworks and Fudge Muppet, who have many theoretical discussions around all of the Elder Scroll games. And thank you very much for making it all the way through this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and feel free to suggest what videos I should do next. I hope to see you all again in future videos. Thanks for watching.